So, welcome everyone to tonight's lecture. It is May the 4th be with you. We are so excited to have you guys with us tonight. My name is Dr. Maggie Hartley. I'm the Director of Public Engagement for the National WWII Museum, and we have quite a treat in store for you guys tonight. But clearly, I did not ace that last class for Jedi training. I'm still working on the lightsaber. But before we get started, I do want to thank our sponsor for tonight, AARP Louisiana. They have generously provided support for a lot of our programming, including our Lunchbox Lecture Series and other lectures throughout the year. So, before we officially get started, I would like to show a quick video from our sponsor.
Hello, I'm Joanne Jenkins, Chief Executive Officer of AARP, America's largest membership organization serving people aged 50 and over. With more than 5 million of our 38 million members currently or previously having served in the military, we're in a mission to support veterans and military families. That's why we've created a wide range of free resources, tools, and community programs to help veterans and military families navigate their options and meet challenges head-on. We've developed a job board that directly connects veterans and military spouses to employers wanting to hire them. And we have free resources that provide some military structure to starting a business. We know that when you're a military veteran caregiver, you start younger, care longer, and face many unique challenges. That's why AARP provides a free military caregiving guide containing important and timely information that you truly need. Because military veterans or service members are twice as likely to be a target for fraud, the AARP Fraud Watch Network, in partnership with Operation Protect Veterans, provides free action alerts detailing the latest scams directed at veterans and military families. And through our state offices nationwide, AARP can help you find the right opportunity to give back to your community and fellow veterans. To learn more about these and other resources, visit aarp.org/veterans. Thank you.
So, for tonight's program, you guys are in for quite a treat. We do have 2 members of our curatorial services team with us. We have Cory Graff, who is our curator, as well as Josh Schick, who is not only our curator, but a restoration manager as well for the museum. They are experts in World War II as well as Star Wars. So they're going to come up here, share a little bit more about the connections between the two over the next, I'd say, 45 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up to you guys for questions afterwards. So without further ado, let's welcome Josh and Cory to the stage.
Well, hello, everyone. Okay, it's on. Good. In our defense, most of our Star Wars knowledge, as we were talking about earlier today, is based on playground conversations, sort of hashing it out.
Exactly. That's actually going to come up tonight. I saw Star Wars in Anchorage, Alaska in 1977, and there were a lot of debates that we'll probably go over a few of them tonight. But did you see this? Free water. This keeps getting better and better.
Dude, that's pretty sweet. I had a cookie earlier with a Chewbacca on it.
So, of course, George Lucas created Star Wars with a lot of other people's help. And Star Wars has lots of elements in it. And what I mean by that is that, there's elements of ancient mythology, samurai films, pulp comics, and great works of literature. And there's also themes and styles, including American car culture, modern Hollywood, and war and aviation, which, of course, this being the World War II Museum, is something that we are going to focus on today. One of the things that's kind of interesting, one of the things that you don't really think about, is the fact that the first movie, Number 4. I know it's a little confusing, but stay with me here.
Is that playground stuff?
Exactly. Well, why is it number 4? That's very confusing. So, oh, I've got the clicker here. I've got to do the clicker. So, this movie is being developed only 30 years after the end of World War II. And what that means is there's a lot of surplus and leftovers, particularly in Southern California. As you might imagine, Southern California was a huge aviation hub with North American and Lockheed and other, Douglas, for instance. And there were these wonderful surplus stores. I've actually had the chance to wander through wide-eyed the Boeing surplus store up in the Seattle area. But this is the type of place where you could buy a Norden bomb sight for $9 after World War II. Or we've all heard these myths. So you're talking about myths when it comes to George Lucas, but there was the myth that you could buy a brand new Jeep in its crate for like $500 or less at the time. And one of the visuals that we see quite a lot is a lot of California hot rodders would take like the 165-gallon tanks, fuel tanks, and put an engine in them and run them on the salt flats. So there's all sorts of stuff happening. Let me see if I can learn how to use the clicker at this place. This is a very important place. And as you might imagine, when you're a prop and art person for a sci-fi movie that's coming out that you probably don't quite understand, this is where you go. And one of the things we're going to be talking tonight about is firearms. We've got some examples, and Josh has been encountering different material in the museum's collection that we're gonna speak about. Did you tell me about these discoveries? Were some of these like, oh wow, look at that?
Yeah, we got a couple. It's kind of funny because, like, of course, my daily work, I'm trying to associate history to people, and we're starting to see younger generations, and it's getting easier to be like, Han Solo's gun. Like, gotcha, all right, tracking, but there's been a couple surprises, actually. I think it's 2 or 3 slides in, something that I hadn't even noticed until probably about a week ago, which actually somewhat excited me because it's something I normally don't get to talk about. So it's all this tons of material culture that has kind of injected its way in everything.
Yeah, okay, so let's start out with a classic. This is the one that you guys all probably know. I don't have to tell you, diving into Wikipedia, that this is a DL44 Blaster. You guys are all familiar, right? Okay, so tell me, Josh, where did this DL44 Blaster come from?
Germany in the 1800s. The Hans Blaster is based on the C96. It's like, well, there's a number of props, so you can really dig into the history and go nuts with it, but is based on the actual frame of a C96, which is a Mauser-produced pistol. It's one of the world's first successful semi-autos. It's got a double-stack magazine for anyone that does pistol stuff. It is a game changer because it becomes very common at the time period for everyone to look for the best pistols. Most people are doing double or single action things, kind of the Wild West guns. The C96 comes online, and now all of a sudden we've got a semi-automatic pistol that they try and convert into carbines and all this, and it sees service through, really in the Boer War, all the way through World War II. Production does not end until basically the 1940s, and we're looking at over 1 million copies roughly of these pistols being sent out into the world, being used by everyone from Winston Churchill to regular German officers during the Second World War. So this is something that would be everywhere. It also has a sort of very kind of clunky, steampunk, early mechanical, iconic look to it. Nothing nearly as slick as, say, like a 1911 or something, and that sort of fits Solo's character better, sort of a somewhat modern Wild West gunslinger.
I have read that one of the first things they were talking with George Lucas about, and we know that he has sort of that lived-in look to things. Things are stained, things are dirty, chipped, bent up, broken, and it was that sort of thing. Is he didn't want the Buck Rogers ray guns. He wanted sort of more utilitarian weaponry. and this would be a great example.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think and look about. You know, nothing, especially military service, stays in absolute perfect condition forever. And so it adds a whole level of depth to it. And it's, you know, you pretty much put a scope and a flash suppressor on anything, and it looks cool. We'll actually find that with just about every weapon in this whole thing.
Yeah, and so the actually the nose of that weapon is a MG81, which is a German aerial machine gun. So that's the flash suppressor we're seeing on the front of that Mauser. Okay, so what's the nickname of this pistol?
That's the broom handle Mauser. The
Okay.
broom handle. That's that big stick that you hold on to.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And now, how you use a scope on a pistol accurately, I'm not exactly sure.
It's a very good question, Corey. Yeah, you know, I'm a little rusty on my laser performances and effects on gravity on laser and initial muzzle velocity, but for a 7.36 millimeter pistol, you don't really need a scope. Most pistol engagements, World War II, anything like that, is really just less than 10 feet. You know, other than that, it's just kind of like chucking a baseball and really trying to get it at the outfield. So, no need for the scope on that one, but looks cool.
All right, let's move on to something a little bit more complex and bizarre. I see some T-shirts out here. I know you guys are all experts, probably bigger experts than we are. But what do you think of when you think of the EE3 carbine rifle? Oh, look at that. See, somebody knows right off the top. Okay, so Josh is wandering through the collection, and he encounters the base of this EE3. And why don't you tell us a little bit about that thing? That's a big bore. That's a monster.
That's a big bore. If you need to let someone know what's going on, this is the weapon for you. This is a Wesley and Scott flare gun. That is the basis of it. You know, you call it a Very pistol, a Very pistol. It is a flare gun. These date from the First World War. They look really intimidating. I mean, obviously, no one wants to get shot by a flare gun. It would be comedic, and it would probably be pretty painful, too. But flare guns are generally used for signaling. You know, and you can almost spot it almost immediately. Now, this is a little bit more important in the First World War, which is kind of the era behind this particular, I would call it a weapon tool. Signals are a little bit more important when communications are a little bit lower. Let's say battlefield communications. The First World War, we still don't have super reliable wireless technology and stuff like that. And so it's sort of, if we make it to the line, we'll shoot a green flare. If things are going bad, we'll shoot a red one, you know, or aircraft in the Second World War will use this as well. And so, super useful thing, not deadly. They try and turn it into a grenade launcher at some point, but this thing is a 37 millimeter bore, which really isn't that much for effective. But you gussy her up a little bit, put some stuff on the barrel, and put a scope on it. You got a pretty sweet piece of technology right there.
You know, one thing that's worth mentioning is a lot of the Star Wars movies originally were filmed in Great Britain. So you do see some of that, and we're going to see a little bit more of that tonight of surplus material from that realm as well. This is started out as like a World War I piece, or like what you would think of as a World War I piece, but Very pistols or flare guns were something that were used for communication, obviously, through World War II as well. An airplane like a P-51 Mustang has a hole, it has a port, so that you can actually communicate, again, as Josh was saying, in very short, simple terms, like my radio's fried. From inside the airplane, you shoot this flare off, or we're all sort of familiar with the classic 12 o'clock high of we've got wounded on board sort of flare gun situation. So this is another piece. Now, okay, so we're getting deeper and deeper and weirder and weirder. This one appears for seconds, maybe split second, but you were able to recognize it in the collection. Okay. I'm going to say it out loud so we can see what the experts think. A CA-87 Blaster. Anybody? Well, who said what? Shotgun. Sort of. Anybody? Any more? No. Well, let's click to it, and you guys are gonna maybe get this. There it is. Yeah.
Yeah, ion, not a thing in World War II. We don't shoot electricity at people in World War II to shut things down. But this is the weapon of the first Jawa that we encounter on Tatooine. You know, R2's kind of doing his thing, kind of walking alone all sad because C-3PO got mad at him in the sand and things went their own ways. And Jawa pops out and hits him. I was actually really excited when I saw this because it wasn't until this week that I realized that below is an example of the Jawa. Above is a Lee Enfield with a Mills Bomb Cup-style thrower on it. I was shocked by this. I'm like, that's nuts. First of all, let's think about a Jawa. They seem to be pretty small. We don't get a lot of idea. I feel like they're pretty lightweight, too. If you do anything with a bolt-action rifle and you cut it down and try and shoot it like a pistol, it's going to airmail you backwards a couple feet. And if you tag R2 with a Mills Bomb thrower, there's no 5 and 6 movie with R2 in it. But it's an interesting, kind of grab. It's, first of all, very iconic weapon. Over 16 million copies of the Enfield are created. There's various makes and marks and all this stuff. Now, during the Second World War, the Brits will take war-weary Lee Enfields. Enfields date to the First World War, guns that have just been kind of shot out and are a little tired, and they will put this cup thrower on the end, and they will reinforce the barrel with brass cable wrapping, and they will toss a grenade. Now, this acts as a bridge between the human arm and the next piece of pulled artillery. So we can toss a grenade about 200 yards with this thing. They appear to just take out about 20 inches of the barrel, suck that cup back on it. In fact, I think this is just something that someone made, but this thing would actually still fire, bolt still intact. You can see where the barrel tapers down. That's where the tip of the round would rest. So that thing's ready to party. It'll break your wrist, but it's it's pretty interesting to see how they used it. Looks cool too.
So okay, I've got a question. I assume that you don't use a real bullet with this when you're throwing Mills bombs around.
No, yeah, definitely. So obviously there's a lot of pressures and ballistics involved with pushing a bullet. Basically, a bullet is way lighter than the powder that's blown up behind it, hence it goes down the tube. Well, when I guess that means it's water time. Talk about Tatooine's throwing me off. So initially, the grenade here had a long rod on it, and they would shove the rod down the barrel, and then they would fire a blank round, which is essentially a bullet. It's a rifle round without the projectile on it, just a bunch of powder in there, and that would push it out the top. Well, that rod in there and that grenade are considerably heavier than a bullet, and so some of the rifles were blowing up on people. So that's when they wrapped the barrels for reinforcement points, and then eventually, it's sort of a trial and error thing. There's usually an engineer involved and stuff, but sometimes they're like, let's try it and see what happens. So that wasn't happening, so they eventually put a flat plate on the end of that grenade that fit right into that cup. It's also extremely heavy. I mean, think about running around with a baseball bat with those practice weights still on it. It's like that's what the Mills bomb tosser is like. So maybe Jawas are a little bit stronger than I thought. Crafty and strong.
Okay, so this one was a little bit easier to recognize. A DL44 heavy blaster. Is this a case of them just doing reshoots or just being like, that's good enough?
We'll touch on this later about how Nazis are the ultimate bad guys. All their weapons technology seems to fit in that nicely as well. This is a MG34 Machine Gun year 1934. This is one of the first German machine guns that sorts to push into this LMG-like machine gun concept. It's a weapon that's on a versatile mount. Can go up on an aircraft vehicle, can be hand-carried, extremely high rate of fire. It's a world-changing weapon, and Star Wars, they're like, let's not really change anything. We don't even need a scope on this thing to make it look cool. So let's just slap it up with a Stormtrooper. He is basically carrying an unadulterated version. There's a little bit of covering where the belt would feed in and everything, but other than that, that is just probably a non-operational MG34 cruising around on Tatooine.
And if you guys are cruising through episode 4, called A New Hope these days, but for a kindergartner in Anchorage, it was Star Wars. You'll see these, of course, in the desert in Tatooine. You'll also see a rack of them in the Death Star, as well when Chewie is captured and Han and Luke in disguise are escorting Chewie. One of the two of them is carrying one of these weapons.
I think Chewie's got the 34. It looks more in proportion on him. And,
right.
And
exactly.
I get what's interesting is kind of, Chewie, I think in the movie, boom, boom, does a little bit accurate shooting with the MG34 shoots around 1,300 rounds a minute. So in about a second, you've fired about 20 rounds of ammunition without even thinking about it. So sort of, I don't know, think about someone that's really small holding onto a fire hose that's just going full tilt, just running over. That's kind of what may have happened if it was actually an MG34 in the Death Star.
Okay, so one more piece of weaponry, super iconic. And it comes from a really bizarre place. I imagine there's an art designer or a set person wandering around in either England or California looking in thrift stores and antique stores to find what they need as sort of the baseline.
Just before you go on, this picture's a little graphic.
Huh?
Picture's a little graphic.
Yeah, it's a little graphic. Are you guys ready? Here we go.
It's a speed graphic. Get it?
Speed graphic. It's a speed graphic. Now, okay, so what we see here is like a lot of forums and things will call it a flash bar. Other people will call it different things. You know the proper name, I assume. He's the curator of a photography exhibit. We'll talk a little bit about later.
It's the flashy brighty thing.
Flashy brighty thing is what it was called. And this is the basis for Luke Skywalker's, what do they call him? Laser sword? Is that it?
Is that what they use in Star Trek? Or
Oh yeah, Star Trek. Yeah, I love tribbles. It's great. No, so this is the basis of the lightsaber, believe it or not. And okay, so what's inside that tube?
So this tube is called a Grafflex, or Graphlight is another version, but it's a Grafflex flash synchronizer. So it is essentially 3 batteries in there and a little mechanical synchronizer that hooks it into the camera, and then there's a flash bulb on the top. So the lightsaber, when it was seen and created, was really basically unmodified except for a couple little things. All it was missing, if you wanted to do pictures with it, was the cone on the top with the flash bulb. So flash bulbs are single use, and they're synchronized mechanically with the camera. So when you pull the trigger on the camera, so to speak, it mechanically triggers the flash bulb a split second before the lens opens so that the light can race out, and then the lens will open and capture the picture, so low or no light situations. So the speed graphic, this camera is called press camera. I mean, pretty well, like for older generations, most stereotype cameras are going to look like this. These things are produced from 1912 into the 1970s. There are flash sticks and synchronizers and bulbs out the wazoo. I mean, these things are just all over the place. And so it's interesting to see it become so iconic.
Well, and it's actually the kind of thing, too, that if you go cruise these things on eBay, even though there was zillions of them made, and people are using them still, just like they're using C96s to make Han Solo blasters, you have sort of an artificial run on these bars just because, here, I got a different picture that looks even a little bit more familiar, that these are inflated in value, and Lord help you if you're a antique photography collector, because there's some people there before you, usually on eBay, buying this sort of thing.
Oh yeah, and there. Let's see the mechanics of it. I believe that little bit is a button, or at least on the toy lightsaber when I had a kid, that was the go button. That's what actually attaches it to the camera. I think they added a red button at the top to turn the initial one on.
Right.
And yeah, them things are expensive too. You can buy a whole graphics camera. It's almost easier and cheaper to find than
just
a
that
flash synchronizer.
So what's inside that thing?
Just a couple batteries, and
Yeah.
then the synchronizer gear at the top. It's kind of funny. We think about like batteries being a little bit more modern. A D-cell battery is pretty common in World War II. It's what powered EE-8 field telephones, a number of other things. And these things have similar power sources.
Okay, so let's go on to something else here.
So we got the flying pancake. You know, and this is where I'm really good at pointing out guns and stuff and little bits of technology, but I bow to Cory's Anchorage knowledge on these types of things.
That sounds good. Well, okay, so this is a Carillion YT 1300F light freighter. We know it better as the Millennium Falcon. You know, I was looking at this, and I was noticing, like, this is one of the only non-symmetrical spaceships in science fiction. I don't at me, I'm sure there's others, but a lot of them are not this way. And it actually sort of reminded me of Germany had a tendency to make sort of peculiar recon airplanes that were offset like this, a pod on one side, an engine on the other. So it was just a little bit of a reminder. But the Millennium Falcon actually started out as sort of a long, almost a more standard, what we would imagine as a rocket ship. In fact, the blockade runner that you see at the very beginning of episode 4, the Rebel ship, is sort of inspired by their early experiments in making the Millennium Falcon. Of course, we're used to this very familiar hamburger-shaped machine that we see before us here. And one of the things that's important to remember is, although Han Solo would tell you that this is the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy, it's not really a fighter plane. And I'll give you an example. I'll kind of toggle back and forth here. More than anything, it has light freighter in the name, meaning it's a cargo airplane or cargo ship, if you will. Sort of more of a Douglas C-47, that's the top airplane in this slide, than anything else. It's meant to move stuff around. The C-47, of course, was inspired or redesigned for the military from the DC-3, which was a passenger airplane of the 1930s. And one of the other things, too, when you maybe compare it to other aircraft, a C-47 could go anywhere. I mean, you know, as we look through sort through photographs in the World War II collection, you see C-47s in the Aleutians, you see them in South America, you see them in Panama, you obviously see them in Europe and the Pacific. They're everywhere. And the Millennium Falcon has that kind of look too. Doesn't need a fancy runway. Sort of, you know, it can land inside a worm if you need to land inside a worm. So you can go anywhere with these. And the C-47 was sort of the same way. Of course, Eisenhower said that along with the Jeep and other things, that this was one of the most important tools of World War II. Now, we also have some comparisons with big bombers. Lucas had grown up in a time where these were very important and probably very fascinating to him. And of course, if we go back and we look at the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon, and then we look at the Boeing B-29 down here on the bottom, we see very, very distinct similarities, and those similarities are also seen on the interior as you look out. There, you know, the more traditional type cockpit of the time was a step cockpit, where you have a glass nose and then you have windshields, if you will, that the B-24 and B-17 had. You can go out and see our B-24 in the Freedom Pavilion, and you can see the B-17 too. This is sort of more like a Heinkel type cockpit. The other thing that's important to discuss, and this is, again, maybe one of our first playground debates, is exactly where are these guns on the Millennium Falcon and where are Luke and Han?
We were talking about this earlier because we're slightly of different generations and you know, different parts of the country and everything. We ended up having the same debate because you watch a movie and then you're just like, wait a minute, the way that gun was oriented and then the way they were swinging around in there didn't quite make sense, because especially if we look at the context of more traditional turrets in World War II aircraft, but there is something different about the 29.
Yeah, the B-29 actually was different. B-29 is super high tech. Again, almost persnickety, which is sort of a Millennium Falcon trait that's sort of unintentional. But the B-29 was super modern, and it was rushed into service super fast, which meant prone to fires, prone to pressure leaks, prone to all sorts of different things, some of which are very, very, very harmful. But it was super high tech, fast, pressurized, fully pressurized. You know, you see the 12 o'clock high boys with the huge shearling vests, and they're fighting the cold. These guys in the Pacific, even though they're at 25,000 feet, are just in their shirt sleeves, even though sometimes they're not really supposed to be. The other thing it had is remote guns, which is something maybe the Millennium Falcon has, maybe it doesn't, depending on what perspective you look at it at. But the way this worked was various gunners peering through bubbles and sighting through these bubbles. You can probably see some of these bubbles towards the waist end of this machine down here. Could actually use the guns remotely. There was 10 of them, and could hand them off between people, which was super modern. And it's kind of as far as gunnery in the Cold War became the standard before speed and stealth take away a lot of the guns.
Did realize that large, hairy mechanics would probably have a problem in the Pacific.
Oh yes, that's true. I suppose that is true. They would have a little bit of a difficulty in the Pacific. You know, another one, speaking of Pacific, that we don't actually have a slide for, but it's worth mentioning, is the Cloud car that we see in Cloud City in Lando's place. It has sort of the look and the feel in a lot of ways of what was the P-82, which became the F-82, which is a North American product, again, California, and it was the twin Mustang. It was the two Mustang bodies that were joined together. And that actually sort of has its origin in the B-29. They thought they were going to have to escort these airplanes across the Pacific, so we're regularly doing 1,500-mile flights, and you've got one guy in a tiny, cramped cockpit of a P-51 Mustang getting just sunbaked the whole time. And the idea came about that, well, perhaps we should have two people in here that could spot one another, because planes like the B-29 and the Mustang are sort of outliving and outlasting sort of human endurance, let alone your bladder endurance. But so the Cloud car, even though I don't know why Lando's guys are wandering around, perhaps they have a long way to go on their planet. I don't know.
Potentially.
I was going to say, this is another kindergarten playground debate. You know, like, are these Stormtroopers robots? They sound like robots. You know, that kind of thing. We were very naive at the time.
We did. We were trying to run through this presentation earlier, and we kept going off on tangents. You know, like,
it's easy to do.
I don't think TK921 was in the bathroom. He may have been in the break room.
Exactly. And we're debating, like, okay, so where did Luke Skywalker's lightsaber end up? Did it fall? What happened to it? I know, you guys all know. There's comics. There's stories about it. Okay, so Josh, here's a quiz. Which one of these is a Porsche product?
Answer your question with a question. Which of these Porsche products has more horsepower?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, which one wins in a race, right? So at the bottom, we have the perhaps slightly less sightly Porsche product. This is the nicknames: the Elephant, the Ferdinand, actually designed by Ferdinand Porsche, whose industry and building power was part of making the V1 flying bomb, as well as the Maus, the Panzer VIII, the huge heavy tank. And this is sort of definitely in that family, but it's not really a tank, is it?
No, it's an assault gun. Well, it's a tank killer, which is a mixture of an assault gun. I've kind of developed this whole rant about this. I've had some. Well, we'll go over the acronym real quick, and then I'll deliver.
Okay, so you want me to go forward one here? Okay, so now we got this.
Yeah. So we've started here, and we were talking about this earlier. I think we need to clear the elephant in the room, so to speak. How is it said?
How is it said? How is the ATAT or the ATAT said? Okay, what do you think? ATAT? AT. See, there's the room is split. Okay, so if it's ATAT, I'll go with that. I'll buy that. This is another playground debate. Okay, so how do you say ATST?
Chicken Walker.
Boom.
Winner, chicken
exactly.
dinner.
That
yes,
came
indeed.
Up, that came up as we were debating this. First of all, I said, when I was young, I didn't even see the ATST in Empire Strikes Back. Like, it went by so fast. Yeah, it had places to go, people to see.
That's what chickens do, man.
That's right. That's what chickens do. So I was very shocked when Return of the Jedi came around, and there's this whole new whole new vehicle. But that was just me being naive. And here's the thing: there was not DVD where you could go and you could like scrub through every frame and figure out like that stormtrooper hit his head, because you just watched it in the theater and you were in awe, and maybe you dropped your popcorn. You didn't even see that part, you know.
So we first of all, AT-AT is correct. AT-AT is wrong. So we got old Ferdinand over here, and this is a long line of German armored vehicles. Now, when we look at the Second World War, the tank kind of comes online as sort of the main mover of the battlefield, and everyone is still trying to figure out what the tank means to them. And it isn't really necessarily tank-on-tank fighting. So they start to kind of split these things into three categories. And so there's the tank. Everything we think of a tank, it's got a turret on it, it spins, it's got a ton of armor, it's really bad news when it shows up. But there are things to consider when building a tank. Turrets are expensive, they're difficult to make, they're limited in size, which means you're limited in boom capability. You can't put a big giant cannon on some of the tanks from the World War II period. And there's other needs. So how do we kill tanks? Well, we want to start coming up with an anti-tank tank. A tank killer, or an American would be a tank destroyer. But there's also the thought of, man, we love having this big armored box cruising around with a giant cannon on it. We should make one of these for the infantry. So they come up with an assault gun. And so you start to see this division where there's a traditional tanks with the spinny turrets on them. They're kind of doing their own thing. Their armored spearhead, their breakthrough. Assault guns and anti-tank tank destroyers start to sort of move in with the infantry. Now, they're simpler in construction, so they do not have a turret on them. They're more sort of directional. Wherever they're facing, they got about a 12-degree wiggle in each direction. But they have a powerful weapon on them that can be directed at either fixed targets, be it a bunker or some sort of defensive formation, or at enemy tanks. And sort of my epiphany of this week when I was equating World War II armored warfare to a galaxy a reasonable distance away and a considerable amount of time ago, I started to realize that the AT-AT is a very directional weapon, like the tank destroyer or the assault gun. Everything is sort of oriented forward. They're a little bit cumbersome. They're not really good, except they do that kind of Hoth, like cow kick, heel shot. But they're very directional and kind of moving in with the assaults are better on the defensive. And the equation to the Ferdinand is pretty impressive in my respects. At least me pulling World War II and throwing it at Star Wars.
So what do you speculate the weaknesses of that of the AT-AT on the battlefield are?
If I'm going to break it down in a very serious manner, it would be that his feet look really cold and he needs a big pair of shoes. No, it's directional, really. They're just like Ferdinand, the Elephant, the Jagdpanther, all these kind of different vehicles. They're very strong on the front. All that armor front towards the enemy, everything's going to hit it, ping off. But they're not so great on the side, and that's how you get a Ferdinand during the Second World War. You work up the sides, you work up the back of them, or you get the radio and call in an airstrike. Although we used bombs, not ropes.
Right, exactly. No harpoons on the P-47s. Okay, so while we're on Hoth, let's stay right here on Hoth. So the French during World War II were sort of working, and this is not a shock. This is not anything new. They're sort of working with a mental mindset of what the last war brought. So the Maginot Line becomes this fixed fortifications, if you will, something impenetrable. And we see that, unlike on Hoth, the Germans just move around it. And Hoth, you were doing a little bit of commenting on what you thought about the depth of this defense on Hoth and how that worked for you.
Yeah, we're talking about World War II influences on Star Wars. I kind of feel like Star Wars could have picked something from World War II and done something called defense in depth. Maybe more than just one line. You know, you generally have got a couple things behind, maybe on the off chance that they blow up your fixed turret that everyone knows the exact location of years ahead of time with maps and, you know, charts and airstrikes and stuff.
So one of these scout robots he's mapped all of the Hoth turrets and knows exactly where they are.
Yeah, I can draw a map right now. It's right there, single line.
That's right, exactly. Okay, so now you're a bit of a naval expert, so tell me about this crazy helmet.
Yes. So the Deck Talker helmet. Great influence in Star Wars. You see it all over the Death Star. Big kind of bulky helmet. They look a little ridiculous, but kind of cool at the same time. This is a World War II creation, that Deck Talker helmet. It was actually created by an artist in Detroit. Now, the thing with helmets is helmets are really kind of come online in the First World War. The idea behind a helmet is not to stop bullets coming at your head. You can't put that much steel on your head. No one needs to get shot in the head unless you get kind of Kevlar and everything sort of coming online now. But back in the day, the helmet was to protect you from head injuries, be it running into stuff, falling over, concussion, maybe small bits of shrapnel. But the more protective helmets get bigger. So regular GI helmet. The Deck Talker helmet was created so that it could provide ample protection for people in fixed mounts that didn't need to be running around. This was designed for anti-aircraft crews on Navy ships, but it's big enough to fit their headsets underneath it so that they can still talk and communicate, which is very important on a naval ship, but they've got ample head, neck, and ear protection. And they don't mind covering their ears with the helmet because they don't need to be listening to anyone other than their headsets.
That's interesting. Okay, so now next we're going to go somewhere. I mean, this is a natural thing that museum curators are incredibly stylish people. I mean, you probably know that. Yeah, look at us. No. And so I know that Josh is going to know a little bit about this. Hugo Boss is like right up his alley, right?
Yeah. So old Hugo Boss. This kind of touches on the concept, and Cory's got a great kind of explanation on this. The Nazi is the ultimate bad guy, and so I'm going to let him deliver it because it's nice. But I'm going to talk about Hugo real quick. So Hugo Boss is he's manufacturing uniforms for the SS. Some of the most iconic uniforms, German military forces. Every military in the world has uniforms that serve a purpose. They want the people in their armed service to look either good or intimidating, whatever message they want to send. They all have got rank indicators. They've got service indicators with ribbons and buttons and all kinds of things. And kind of my rant with it is it's your job resume. Without having to know the person, you can see the uniform and tell it. And it's that iconic status of seeing it. So Hugo Boss is working for the Nazis very early on, manufacturing their shirts, and ends up following a lot of their designs and producing them for most of the war period. A reputation he tries to shake after the war, but he passes within 2 years of the war.
Yeah, and it should be said, and when we talk to Lucas after the fact, he fully admits that this is a little bit of shorthand on his part. Getting from A to B to C quickly in a movie is very important. You don't have necessarily time for exposition or unnecessary exposition. So we have a situation where just 30 years after the end of World War II, that you can have these imperial naval uniforms look very Nazi-esque, and you can cover a lot of ground, chop a lot of wood without even really saying a thing. It's just a visual that happens right away that allows you to know that these are not the maybe most upstanding folks in the galaxy. Was that 5? Okay. Well, Now we've got to talk about these guys, Stormtroopers. This is another playground debate. What are Stormtroopers, and how do they fit into history? Now, my version of Stormtroopers that I knew about was sort of the 1930s Nazi party thugs, inspired by the black shirts of Italy of the time. This was sort of a way to get things done. You can maybe illuminate that. That was the way things rolled in politics at the time.
Yeah, you make more noise and you push people around and you intimidate people, and that's what these stormtrooper and these black shirts were. But I kind of see two things when I look at a stormtrooper, and they borrow from two different things. We're definitely obviously we're Hugo Boss in it. We're looking at the Empire. Everything's kind of sort of slick, and it's very indicated what we're talking about from an Earth perspective on all this. Well, the Stormtroopers are kind of one of those things that are interesting to me because they tap into both. We see that Nazism, we see that pushing around, we see that Stormtroopers, but the way that they're physically oriented, to me, actually harkens back to the First World War, where there is actual Stormtroopers. The original Stormtroopers are actually from the German army. These are specialized assault troops. The stalemate, this is reasonably early in the First World War. The stalemate of the trenches is, just a bunch of riflemen hanging out in trenches, taking artillery fire and then running up in a machine gun fire. And everyone's like, we got to figure out a way to do this. They basically don't, but they start to make some inroads. And Stormtroopers are the one way that the Germans attempt to break that stalemate. And these are what we would call shock troops. I wouldn't necessarily call them special forces today, but heavily armed infantry. They're going to bring flamethrowers. They're going to bring submachine guns, things that give them more rapid rates of fire while they're moving forward, brings their element of fire support with them. They will bring what they called in the First World War melee weapons, clubs with spikes on them, axes, knives, anything like that. Their objective is to close in basically on the tail end of a gas attack or an artillery barrage, get into the trench and start moving it on. They will push past and bypass fixed positions. They want to get into the rear areas and start disrupting artillery battery supply, command posts. They're supposed to assault these specific things. So to me, I see Stormtroopers, and it's sort of this mix between heavy infantry, this sort of unstoppable, intimidating assault, and the strong men that show up to say, hey, this is how things are. We're here.
So we're going to speed it up here. We've got to get to the conclusion of our talk. And
Leia's Luke's sister.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They
Sorry.
kiss.
It's
bit. Weird. Okay.
A little bit.
We'll talk about that later, maybe offline. So we get to the conclusion of episode 4, and we have the Battle of Yavin, Death Star dogfight, if you will. And the inspiration for this clearly comes from a series of 1950s and 1960s movies that are all very similar in a lot of ways, theme-wise. We have Bridges at Toko-Ri from 1954, where you've got to go and attack this impossible target that's heavily defended. We have Dam Busters, which is obviously a World War II somewhat true story. The Dam Busters are true. The story in Hollywood from 1955 is pseudo-true. Again, you're attacking a small target through impossible artillery fire. And a lot of people believe that the novel and then the movie 633 Squadron, you see that on my left. I've got to do stage left, stage right. Where de Havilland Mosquitoes from the Royal Air Force attack a German factory, and they do so down a Norwegian fjord. So we have our trench, if you will, in World War II, and they're attacking this factory at the end. And, of course, anti-aircraft raining down upon them. Now, on a hardware level, one of the things that's sort of interesting to think about when we come to episode 4 is there are these days, if you talk to Kenner or Hasbro, there are all sorts of spaceships of various types that appear in Star Wars. But we had very few in the first movie. And, my segue is not working. I'm going to hop to this one. So one of the things that we see is a big inspiration from 1969's Battle of Britain, which was based on a thing that happened during World War II that you probably are quite familiar with. So the Supermarine Spitfire, that's the top of our picture here, was sort of the glamour boy, speedy, made from an racing airplane, very wondrous construction. And then the shaggy, shabby Hawker Hurricane down below that took on a lot of times attacking the bombers during the Battle of Britain. Not made, sort of old. The joke with this is that it's a biplane where they just pulled off the top wing. It's built completely differently. It's basically like a big bridge girder with fabric hanging on it. And this sort of takes the place of the X-wing, which Luke flew, and the Y-wing, which is kind of this shabby, old by the time the Battle of Yavin comes around. And you had a little commentary on Luke and his X-wing.
It did, yeah. I know it's been said before, but it always sticks out with me. All right. Both of these are very complicated military machines. Luke Skywalker's with the rebellion for like 72 hours, maybe. And he goes from shooting nutria from the back of a pickup truck to going to the naval base and jumping in an F-15. These are very complicated machines to operate. That's always driven me nuts. It's like I don't know. I guess he's a good pilot.
So one of the shocks when this was first shown. By the way, Lucas billed it to his friends, and his friends are like Brian De Palma and Steven Spielberg and critics and things like that, as a kids movie, people, a kids movie. And he didn't have it completely done when he showed it to his friends, and they were completely flummoxed. It was long, it was weird, in essence, it was poorly acted, a lot of them said. There were no sound effects, there's no John Williams scores, and there's no special effects. In fact, what threw people off is, in the place of the yet-to-be-finished special effects, Lucas was pulling newsreel footage and movie footage and putting it in. And William Hike, who was a critic at the time, was like, you're watching a Wookiee in a spaceship, and then you're watching Bridges at Toko-Ri, and it's just like, what the heck is going on? So there was a method to this madness. Someone like John Dykstra, who was making the models and doing the special effects, would get this newsreel footage of like, this is what I want Porkin's X-Wing to look like as it comes apart. And he would use kamikaze footage similar to what we have up here, and Dykstra would do his best to imitate that within the visuals. So now, okay, so we have our Spitfire and Hurricane. We have to complete the trifecta and talk about this really briefly. Do you know what TIE stands for in TIE Fighter?
Spicy food.
Very close. Twin ion engine. This machine, of course, has that same look. Maybe a little bit of a sinister look. The BF-109, the Messerschmitt, which was the primary fighter of during the Battle of Britain for Germany, has that same look as well. Sort of gray, sort of angular. There's some logic to this. An airplane like a Spitfire was massively hard to make. Lots of compound curves. It looks beautiful, not easy to make. Something like this, where all the glass in the cockpit is flat, is much easier to make on a level that's higher volumes than we would see Supermarine being able to do in the UK. And I would imagine it's got to be the same way for the Empire. They want to pump out these TIE fighters one after the other. If you'll indulge me for a second, and then we'll wrap up. One of the other things that's worth mentioning that is sort of throughout Star Wars, is sort of steeped in it, is sort of the collection of sounds that appear in Star Wars. Our man Ben Burt here on the left was instrumental in capturing a lot of the sounds. And a lot of the sounds for the ships actually come from an unusual place. They come from World War II aircraft, albeit years later. I'll read a little quote about being in Mojave in the 1970s. He says, while at the races, I just said, I'd like to record some planes. And they said, yeah, okay, go on out there. It would never happen nowadays. Out at the pylons, the planes passing 15 feet over my head. They were so fast you could hardly see them go by, just a blur. You could smell the oil and the exhaust as I was laying flat on the ground with my microphones, recording these airplanes for a couple of days in the desert. I got really good stuff. Almost all the spaceships from Star Wars are from those Mojave recordings, including the Falcon. So what you see is these World War II airplanes, most of them Mustangs, make their way into, I assume that they're in the Mandalorian and all these other things even today. They're disguised somewhat. A lot of times a thunderclap or a lion's roar are layered over the top. There's a lot to them. But a lot of the base are these World War II airplanes that were still being used during air races.
I think just the thing to think about, the noise, watch the movies and then listen for the noise. Especially a proper fighter aircraft from the Second World War kind of screams and whines. You know, you're hearing, we think of like airplanes on a tarmac idling, kind of like chugga 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 chugga, you know, the props kind of chopping water, chopping air. When an aircraft shoots by, you're hearing engine noise and exhaust coming out and the air fracturing when it hits those propellers. So you just get this great scream. So whenever you hear kind of like a scream or a whine in the Star Wars movie, kind of think about that and go on YouTube and watch a bunch of P-51s zooming by.
Now with that, we're going to wrap up and we're open to take questions. We'll do our best to lie our way through them.
Before we start our questions, let's give Josh and Cory a round of applause. So for the Q&A, if you are here watching in person, if you will raise your hand, I will bring the mic to you just so we make sure that our online audience as well as Josh and Cory can hear you. For our online audience, you can place your questions within the comments and we will get to those shortly. So, any questions?
My question is, those defensive turrets in the Battle of Hoth. I have this huge debate with my friend, and I wonder if you two can answer it. Are those remote controlled or manned, or like personally manned?
You know, my opinion, no, never mind. The disc one is totally remote control. What I remember from the movie is a guy with a remote control, and he's doing it, and that thing cooks off in the background.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, I haven't really thought of it, and I'm trying to think back to my toys, whether there actually was a door in them. I had the micro version, but I don't remember. You know what? You guys are so much farther along than we are, because we're trying to figure out who's a robot and who's real, and you're like way into it, and I'm anxious to hear what you guys find out.
Yeah, I'm going manned.
Yeah,
for the white ones.
manned.
I'm going
Do you
manned.
think Cliff Clavin was the one in charge of those?
Could have been.
You know that what John Ratzenberger is actually in the Empire Strikes Back as one of the soldiers. So Cliff Clavin may be in charge of those turrets.
Yeah, if we're drawing a parallel to Maginot Line, I'd go manned. It's the only thing that makes sense. You got to be able to access a breach of a weapon and then slew it and train it. You know, so if that's what you said, then that's it.
So our next question is from YouTube, and this is specifically for Josh, or who, as he was known when they were kids, Joshy Wan Kenobi.
Hi, Vanessa.
Given the opportunity to utilize any of the era-inspired weapons against Darth Vader, what would you choose and why?
It's a good one. Cory, why don't you take this one?
Era-inspired, you mean like 1940s weapons?
Yeah, let's go 1940s.
What would you use against Darth Vader? That's a great question. I mean, you know, it wouldn't take a lot for him to fend off an atomic bomb,
Yeah,
right?
pretty much.
That's not going to work. How about the Yamato? Can he handle the Yamato?
Possibly. He's definitely using the choke on me right now.
Oh, he's using the choke on you.
Man,
Yeah.
that's a really good question. What would I use on Darth Vader? I don't know. Let's see. Darth Vader's kind of like a tank.
Mm-hmm.
Difficult
Okay.
to stop, so we need
Yeah.
a standoff weapon.
Right. You want to do it from far away.
It's got to be multiple shot, though. He's going to catch it. Can't do an M2 bazooka. You know, it's 60 mil round. He can probably just catch it and toss it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going flamethrower.
Flamethrower? Oh, that's not too bad. It's not
Yeah,
too bad.
That's what caused the whole thing to begin with.
right.
So
Exactly.
might bring back some bad memories.
That's right. Exactly.
Give me a chance
You
to
gotta-
hightail it.
That's a great idea. You got to go psychology. You know, there's no conventional weapon that's going to be able to stop him.
Yeah,
so you've
because
got
you
to get
can't
in
do
his head.
flamethrower and Spitfire because I can operate a flamethrower because it's a trigger. A Spitfire, as we've established, is very complicated. It's fast, but I couldn't just jump in it and go. So
Okay.
I'm hoofing it.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so to the right, you're right in the back.
So I was just wondering why, other than today's May 4th, why is the title of this called The Fourth Be With You?
Well, it's just a play on the May 4th thing, the Star Wars thing. So, you know, this is the thing too. We're into some grim stuff around here. We have to talk about the people that made a supreme sacrifice, and obviously a lot of the things about the history of World War II are kind of tough, and so the staff looks for ways to sort of look at things from different angles, twist things around. So something like May the 4th, Star Wars Day, is something that we can spread our wings and talk to people about something that's quite a fun thing.
100% agree on that.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like we
I was
have any
gonna
more
say.
online questions.
That means
Or
we
in
were
person.
thorough.
Last chance.
Nobody
Oh,
wants to
one
know
more
what
question.
our favorite Ewoks are, or
Like, where would you scratch Chewbacca? I'd go ears. I mean, that's pretty solid. You know,
what's in the bandolier? That's what I want to know.
dude, lunch
Soap?
totally.
So, a big part of Star Wars is that it is now an ongoing legacy. We continue to see iterations of Star Wars in pop culture today. What is something that you, as curators, would like to see continue to live on in Star Wars' legacy?
I don't know, man. You know, it's like I'm in bonus time. I always thought that, you know, like 7 was it. You know, like we're never gonna see Star Wars again.
You're an OT, huh?
Yeah.
Well, you know, one of the things that I'm fascinated with, which is kind of a new development, is sort of moving beyond the Skywalker family story, which, you know, is sort of the thing. Is I want to see different. Okay, and forgive me. I know that this. I've had enough of Tatooine. I just want to go to different places. I want to see different things. The other thing that I want to know, I want to go to a planet that actually has more than one environment on it. It's not just this is not just a forest moon. This is not just an ice planet. It's like, hey, you know, we're here, but we go to vacation here, and you should see this. That's right, the Outer Rim, exactly. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that, you know, a lot of people talk about Rogue One as sort of a war movie and The Mandalorian as a cowboy genre. And certainly you could have a, you know, detective-type stories. You could do all sorts of things in that Star Wars language that you could even have a rom-com. Yeah.
Well, and that's the interesting thing is like it. You know, I did get asked a lot. They're like, well, what kind of like World War II stuff do you want to continue to see in Star Wars? And it's like, you know, I'm just, because we're at the museum and this is a museum event, we're snagging from the Second World War and kind of applying it and talking about it. But it's like in reality, it's just such a great complex story that borrows from so many things in history. As long as it keeps rolling in the direction that it is, it just pulls all of these things that we see and think and provoke thought and isn't just a, you know, a shooty stabby movie. It's about a little bit more, you know, Vacation on the Outer Rim, that kind of thing. I'm excited to just see it keep going, and it will, as it continues, more than likely cross paths with subjects from the Second World War, and we'll just do that next year, right about this time.
So we do have a question from our online audience. So if you had to replace Han Solo with a World War II general, who would it be?
Online audience is killing us tonight.
Well, okay, so you need someone who's somewhat handsome, a little bit roguish. You know, I mean, Patton and
You mean Patton?
and Patton and Bradley just don't do it. You know.
No, yeah, it's totally an amalgamation of personalities. You go full Patton. Obviously, you got the pistols. You got the kind of I'm Patton and everything. But you got the humility of Bradley, the cool-headedness of Eisenhower. He's kind of.
How about any handsome general or admirals? I mean, if we open this up to the Navy, is there some sort of roguish admiral that you can think of?
I mean, we could put it. I don't know. Halsey's too old.
He's too old.
A little
He's
too
too
screamy.
Old. We're like casting up here, just like,
I know, yeah.
oh,
Woody
Halsey's
Harrelson.
too old. Get him out of here.
No, that's a great one. That's a hard to react to because we look at World War II generals and admirals, and we're kind of looking at the body of their work at the end. Like, this is what they did. When it's like, in reality, I start thinking about Solo, and I see an evolutionary character. Guy's out on its own, shooting lizards in bars, and then all of a sudden he is a general, and he's sort of invested in all this stuff. And so, his character kind of shifts and changes a lot. So on the fly, it's hard for me to assign that to someone. Oh yeah, Pappy. Yeah, you do Pappy Boyington. Actually, you know what? That's a good parallel. Not an admiral, obviously, but Pappy is somewhat of a rogue, but beloved by his crew and everything. Gets captured, so there's definitely some parallels there. I like that.
Charismatic, maybe in over his head every once in a while.
So we have one more question from our online audience. This will be our final question for the night. So if you could pick a favorite Star Wars weapon or craft, what would you choose and why?
Oh, well, first of all, you're reading those questions off of your watch, your smartwatch.
While I can.
That's very high tech as it is. That's
I'll take one of those.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think I would want an A-wing. It fits in the garage. It's fast. I think that would be. I mean, getting someone to work on it would be a little bit of a difficulty. I don't think there's a lot of A-wing mechanics here in New Orleans, but I think I'd pick an A-wing.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to go stereotypical, but I'd end up going X-wing. Slick, got a good sound to it. Decent cannons. I'm pretty methodical when I drive, so I think I would remember to lock the S-foils back before I land. It's kind of like, but they have automatic headlights now, so they probably have a ground radar thing too. So I'm gonna go X-wing.
Let me pitch you something though. What if in your kitchen drawer you had a lightsaber, and Thanksgiving you could just be like, here you go.
Oh, I've always wanted the full lightsaber set, the butter knife,
right? And like
the turkey carver.
if there was a plumbing situation, you could just be like, well, that needs to be cut out, and then you just go from there.
I think it's solid. We gotta.
It could be
our
a
business
real
plan.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, you could weed with it. You could just be like, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead.
All right, well, thank you all very much for coming and putting up with us tonight.
Thank you, Josh and Cory, for sharing your time, your wisdom, and your Star Wars childhood playground conversations with us tonight. Josh, Ewan Kenobi, I will never forget that ever again. I may mention that in a few meetings coming up. Now, thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you guys had just as great of a time as I've had tonight. To our online audience, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed tonight's program, I encourage you guys to also go check out, especially if you have children, our workshop that came out today for May the 4th. It was a virtual lightsaber workshop So I encourage you guys to go check that out online. It's on our website, our Facebook page, YouTube, and Vimeo. So you can pretty much find it anywhere online at this point. If you also enjoyed lectures like this and other events, you can find all that information online. But again, thank you for coming out. Take care, and we will see you next time here at the National World War II Museum.